Here's how to plant a flag on the Moon and safely return for the first time in Kerbal Space Program. Let's start by building our rocket. I'm going to choose a one-seater command pod and attach a parachute. Optionally, we can add a heat shield, but we won't really need it. Below this, I then place a decoupler and a fairly small liquid fuel tank with a Terrier engine on the bottom. You then want to add some landing legs, making sure that they reach below the engine. Then make sure to right-click them and retract them before we launch. Now let's build out the main launcher. I'm going to stack several large liquid fuel tanks and then place a swivel engine on the bottom. Here I duplicate the bottom of the rocket by alt-clicking the relevant part and then attaching some radial decouplers on the side. I'd then place the duplicated parts on the decouplers and add nose cones, as well as some struts. I'd then add some fins at the bottom of the rocket to help with control, but lastly, we want to fix our staging. Once we've done that, we're ready to launch. When you launch, you're going to want to go into a low Kerbin orbit, between 100 and 200 kilometers above the surface, which I'm going to assume you already know how to do. You'd then want to time warp until you just see the Moon rising over the horizon. When you do, turn your rocket to face the prograde marker on the nav ball and fire your engines. Now let's check the map. We want to keep burning our engines until we get an encounter with the Moon, ideally one that won't make us crash directly into it or fling us out of the Kerbin system entirely. Now we can time warp until we enter the Moon's sphere of influence. When we arrive, we want to warp down to the periapsis and then point retrograde on the nav ball and burn our engines until we're captured into a closed orbit of the Moon. But our orbit doesn't have to be a perfect circle here. Now let's choose roughly where we want to land. I quite like the look of this big crater, so I decide to land there. To do this, you want to choose a point in your orbit that is roughly on the opposite side of the Moon to your landing site, and that's where you want to do a burn. Here you're going to burn retrograde until your periapsis completely disappears and your trajectory intersects the crater. Now for the actually hard part, landing. To do this, warp until you're roughly 20 kilometers above the surface. Now check your speed on the nav bar. Make sure that it says surface instead of orbit. You can click the speedometer to change this. Now start burning retrograde until you're moving fairly slowly. Less than 50 meters per second here should be fine. You'll notice that we've essentially come to a stop, several kilometers above the ground. This is what we want, as we're now going to descend roughly vertically. Here it would be wise to put your altimeter in terrain mode, so you know exactly how high you are above the ground. Now as we descend, we're going to control our speed. My general rule of thumb is to look at your altitude above the terrain and then divide it by 10. This gives you a maximum speed in meters per second, so you want to burn retrograde to make sure that you stay under this speed limit for the given altitude. Eventually you'll touch down softly. Your Kerbal can now get out and plant the flag. When you're finished playing around in the low gravity, we can jump back into the command pod and prepare to return. For our return, we want to put ourselves into a fairly low Moon orbit. To do this, we want an eastward gravity turn similar to what we would do in Kerbin, but because there's no atmosphere, we can start it very early and turn very aggressively. Just make sure you don't crash into any mountains. Now we're in orbit. We're going to work out how to get back to Kerbin. So let's zoom out and look at the orbit of the Moon. We want to do a burn here that is essentially like burning retrograde from the Moon's orbit, which would reduce our periapsis on Kerbin. For this, I position a maneuver node on the side of the Moon that faces Kerbin, and set it up to do a prograde burn there. You'll notice how when we burn prograde for long enough, we escape the Moon entirely, and our new orbit around Kerbin has a lower periapsis, which was what we wanted. So set up this node so that your Kerbin periapsis is around about 35 kilometers above the surface, and then complete the burn. Now we're on our way back. Before we re-enter, it's a wise idea to use any remaining fuel that we have to decrease our speed before re-entry. To do this, simply burn retrograde before coming into the atmosphere, but do keep in mind that the atmosphere starts at 70 kilometers, so make sure you do it before this. But with that, our capsule should survive re-entry, and our Kerbal lives to see another day. If you found this helpful, make sure to subscribe so you never miss another Kerbal Physics video.